Hello, everyone. I'm Johanna Goss. I'm a lecturer in Lens and Time-Based Art Histories at the Courtauld and the co-lead on the MA in Contemporary Art and the Moving Image, or CAMI.
I'm Erica Balsam. I'm a reader in film studies at King's College London and the other co-lead on the CAMI MA.
And so we're here today just to have a virtual open day and describe the program and also answer any questions that you might have about CAMI. Just to introduce what the MA in Contemporary Art and the Moving Image is, it is a unique MA program on artist moving image that is both cross-disciplinary and cross-institutional, which is to say that it is an MA that is at based at both the Courtauld Institute of Art and King's College London's Film Studies Department, and the electives and curriculum that you will have in the program is completely shared between the two institutions and the two departments. CAMI students will study the intersection of contemporary art and the moving image, which encompasses film, video, digital media, which we believe is one of the most vital areas of contemporary artistic practice today. Students in the MA will take a combination of core and elective modules that are again shared between the Courtauld and King's Film Studies. And this will look like a mix of more specialized courses in film studies and some hands-on application of, for instance, curating and exhibition making. And we can describe a bit more in depth later when we look at the program in more detail. We think that CAMI will prepare students for a wide range of employment across the cultural sector, whether in public programming, in film programming, or cultural programming, or arts programming, events, work in museums and galleries sector, theaters, film festivals, critical arts writing, and of course, academia. We are the course co-leads, as we've just introduced ourselves. I am based at the Courtauld, and I'm an art historian specializing in experimental film and media. And Erica, maybe you can say a little bit more about your research and teaching at King's.
Sure. So I'm based in the film studies department at King's, and I work primarily on the areas of experimental film, artist moving image, documentary practice, and film theory. So Johanna and I, it's interesting because we work sort of on similar things, but in a way coming from slightly different disciplinary backgrounds. And so this makes, I think, for a very interesting combination in the CAMI program.
Yeah, and the CAMI program really represents exactly this cross section and brings together people who are interested in the very same field, the same types of practices, but are coming at it from, as Erica says, slightly different, but also overlapping disciplinary backgrounds and connections. I'll also note that both Erica and I are involved in curating, and Erica has a very exciting slate of curatorial projects that she's been working on for many years. And you can read more about, her curatorial practice if you're interested. And of course, we also will have some curatorial components of the MA that are taught through the Courtauld. Um, I think one thing we might say at this juncture when thinking about our roles as co-leads, because there will be different co-leads that come on to lead the program, but are really based fundamentally at the Courtauld and at King's Film Studies, is that in many ways we've talked about how CAMI is really the program that we would have liked to see when we were looking at graduate programs, postgraduate programs coming out of our BA, but it didn't exist. And so, in some ways, we've really built this program as the ideal program for somebody interested in this topic that really puts together, connects the dots in ways that hasn't really happened before in terms of this interdisciplinarity and, of course, highly specialized focus. Here's just a moment to think a little bit in more detail about what the program looks like. Here you see the prospectus for CAMI offered through the Courtauld prospectus. And what you see is that the the inaugural year of CAMI, which was this year, we had 10 students in the program. Next year, we're looking at upwards of 20 students that will be enrolled in the program as our target. The program is a 12-month program, which means it differs slightly from other programs at the Courtauld in the history of art, which are 9 months. The 12-month duration of the program allows for more space and time to develop the dissertation. And that aligns also, that 12-month length aligns with the MA in Film Studies, which in which CAMI is sort of based within the MA in Film Studies at King's College London. You can read more about the sort of intellectual and curricular foundations of the program here, but in terms of the nuts and bolts, the MA is divided into 180 credits. You'll take 50-50 of those credits between King's and the Courtauld. There will be two required core modules, Histories and Theories of Contemporary Art and the Moving Image, which is taught by me at the Courtauld, which you take in your first semester, the fall. And then in the spring semester, you'll take the core module at King's London Film Cultures, which is also 30 credits. Besides that, you have two mandatory classes that you take at the Courtauld, one in each semester. Critical Debates, which is an art history's methodologies, large-scale lecture with a seminar component that looks at modern contemporary art historical methodologies. And then in the spring, you'll take Examining Exhibitions, which looks at exhibition practice, the history of exhibitions, and contemporary curatorial practices today at the Courtauld. In addition to that, each of those semesters, you'll also take an elective postgraduate seminar in King's Film Studies. And you'll see those optional modules listed below the required modules. And you'll see that they have titles like Media Aesthetics, Topics in American Cinema, Thinking Cinema. Maybe I could ask Erica to describe a bit in terms of why those modules have such open-ended titles.
Sure. All of the MA optional modules have these broad umbrella headings for a reason, and that is to give the opportunity to the instructors leading these modules to develop them in ways that are research-based and that speak to their own specializations. So you might have topics in global cinema, which sounds immensely broad. But for instance, this spring, I will be teaching that as a class that looks at experimental documentary practices in a global context from the late 60s to the present, specifically thinking about debates over the status of realism and the politics of form. And so all of these options change year on year. And prior to enrollment, a list of more specific descriptions that speak to the kind of concrete details of the modules will be circulated to students. So when you select your optional modules, you won't be selecting topics in Asian cinema. You will be selecting from, a much more specific sense of what that module will be that year.
That's great, Erica. And I think that gives a really good picture of how a student who enrolls in CAMI would experience that kind of optionality, that they could find their own way through the program, build their own sort of route, choose their own path through the program, and also pursue their own interests, but also guided by some research-driven teaching in those seminars, which is really exciting and allows students to have access to a variety of different faculty in both institutions, which is one of the other great assets of the program. I might also mention that both Histories and Theories of Contemporary Art and the Moving Image and London Film Cultures have very strong off-site components, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a little bit, mostly about my own core module, Histories and Theories, and maybe I'll ask Erica to describe a bit more about London Film Cultures, because these core modules really, I do think, form the kind of crux of the experience for CAMI students. But before I get into that, I want to just highlight some other aspects of the course. Now, one thing to understand about CAMI is that it is really, at its heart, a humanities MA, which means that its emphasis is on critical writing, close observation and viewing, discussion and seminar, and specifically, you will be writing essays as part of your assessment in many of the classes that you take. You'll see under the assessment tab that You'll be writing essays, short reports, putting together, for instance, in critical debates, a portfolio that includes annotated bibliography and other types of short form writing. There are options within CAMI for practice-based research, but those, again, are electives that you have to intentionally nominate and enroll in electives in which you learn about practice-based research and filmmaking in particular. And that opens up a sort of pipeline into doing a practice-based dissertation. And we'll talk more about dissertations in a bit, but it's just to note that this is not a practice-based degree. This is a humanities degree that has certain elements of practice-based research. Another place that practice comes into play is in examining exhibitions for which students prepare a virtual exhibition project, which is one of the most favorite kinds of assessments that students at the Courtauld have developed, in which you essentially design an exhibition, whether that be through an installation, or you design, for instance, a film program or a sort of screening series that will be accompanied by some written text, but is predominantly a practice-based assessment. Let's see, what's next? One thing I also want to report, which is exciting news that we've just heard, is that in 2026, 27, which is the next year's cohort, the Courtauld will have available a scholarship grant from the Convocation Trust to support widening participation. There'll be a scholarship of 14,500 to cover tuition for a home student on MA CAMI. And the deadline for applications to this scholarship is quite soon. It is the 12th of January, so just a little over 1 month from now. More information about this scholarship opportunity can be found on the Courtauld's postgraduate funding webpage, and we'll also be sending out a link to information about this with the link to this virtual open day recording. And if you have any other further questions about that, you can always contact me to ask any questions or the Courtauld admissions, because this scholarship is offered through the Courtauld. Now, pivoting back to talking more about the curriculum and sort of the experience that a CAMI student would have, I wanted to just talk a bit about the experiences that this inaugural cohort has had in my Histories and Theories core module, which we have had, I think, a total of 4 offsite trips, all London-based. There's been an amazing slate of exhibitions up in the city this year, this fall, and we've taken full advantage of them. And there's many more than we could ever all see together. So I'm often sending students off to visit exhibitions or go to screenings on their own time, but there's never a lack of things to see in London. Really the exhibition program is beyond world class. I think there's a particular density and real concentration of moving image art exhibitions in London that students will be able to benefit from. So one example of that is the Art Now exhibition at Tate Britain, which highlights a London-based contemporary artist. This fall, that exhibition has been a solo presentation by Onyeka Igwe, who is a Nigerian-British experimental filmmaker, moving image artist who is based in London and whose work often deals with archives and colonial archives. Been a phenomenal resource for the students this year to also have a visiting lecture from Onyeke in their critical debates module, and then to go to Tate Britain, see the exhibition in person, watch films by Onyeke on their own time, and then have a study day at Tate Britain led by a curator. So multiple different opportunities to engage with contemporary art practice really at the forefront of what is happening today. And I also mentioned that Onyeke was recently the recipient, a shared recipient of the Jarman Award with Morgan Quaintance. So her work is up at multiple different exhibitions in London this fall that we've taken full advantage of. Now, I can't tell you what's going to be on view next fall because that hasn't been fully announced yet, but we will obviously be enjoying many, many offsite trips in my core module, and you will also be going offsite in London Film Cultures, which I'll let Erica say more about since she has led that module in the past. But one thing I would like to mention is that unlike this year, where we really stayed in the city for most of our offsites. Next fall, I am planning an international offsite, I should say, student trip to the Venice Biennale to see in Minor Keys, which is the 2026 Biennale, and in particular to visit some of the offsite pavilions at the Venice Biennale. For instance, the pavilion that is organized by the Fondazione Between Art Film, which is a really exquisite presentation of moving image art in situ in an architectural venue in Venice, as often a historical architectural venue, which really highlights the possibilities of moving image installation today. Erica, could you say a bit more about London film cultures?
Sure. London Film Cultures, as Johanna mentioned, is the core module you'll take in term two at King's. And this is a module that takes place in small seminar groups and looks at London film cultures in the plural. So it's not focused only on artist moving image practices and their place within London, but this is a very substantial component of it. And the module is really divided between seminars and assigned readings that look at topics like archives, festivals, curating, film criticism, film events, and so on. Um, and then going out to things. And so these are not collective class visits for the most part. We do often two group visits. But the idea of the module is really that you can explore London with recommendations from us. And students often do this kind of in small, informal groups and really get out and participate in the very diverse film cultures that exist in the city across a range of different kinds of spaces. And the assessments for that module really reflect this emphasis on kind of contemporary exhibition practice. There is a pitch for a film season or a film event that you would curate at a given London institution. And so the idea there is that you really demonstrate not only that you have ideas about what might be interesting to curate, but also that you understand how that project could fit within the real institutional landscape of London. So you really need to understand something about the programming happening at these various places in order to cite your proposal within one of them. And then the other assessment is a logbook made up of four 1,000 word entries that are essentially almost field work reports on different events that you attend in London, and you put these experiences that you have into dialogue with some of the critical concepts and scholarly literature that you'll come across in the seminar. So I find it to be a really exciting module to teach, and students generally really love this opportunity to kind of have somewhat of a guided immersion in the film culture of London, because as Johanna said, I mean, it's really, maybe some of you already live here, maybe some of you are less familiar with the city, but I can say, I moved here from North America exactly because to me it seemed like such an exciting context for moving image practice. And so I think we tried to really interweave that with the CAMI program as much as possible.
That's great. That module sounds fabulous. I wish I could take it. And I think what's really important are two things about the ways that this curricular structure really opens things up for students in CAMI in a unique fashion. One is that we get out into the city. We're not just staying in the classroom. We're often even traveling abroad to go see work in situ. So even though our topic of study is artist moving image, which is a reproducible media that we can potentially stream on our laptops, nevertheless, we're really fundamentally interested in the social sites in which these places are shown, these works are shown. And we're interested in examining how audiences are engaging with these, how these works are interacting with certain geographies, certain architectural spaces, sites, institutional spaces, and so on. So being out and seeing work, moving image work often, completely interlaced with other forms of artistic production in a venue such as Tate Britain, how the moving image really has kind of I don't want to say invaded, but it has really permeated the ecology of contemporary art today. It is inextricable from it. It is dominant within the field of artistic production. And so we really are interested in exploring that firsthand. So as to the extent that we say this is a humanities MA, we also want to, reassure you that that doesn't mean that we're exclusively reading, writing alone. In fact, the social and the community building activities of seeing work together with your peers is really fundamental to CAMI. And I think you can see that in terms of the emphasis on offsite visits. And I should mention as well, we're not just seeing work exhibited or installed. We have other forms of engagement, as Erica mentioned, with archives, visiting even libraries. We've done that this semester. There's lots of different ways to engage with the artist film community, but also with contemporary art that are not exclusively about seeing work in museums or galleries. So there's a whole variety of different kind of ways that we're interfacing with this field that I agree I find very exciting. And it's again sort of the idea of tailoring a program that is exactly the kind of things that you would have liked to have experienced as a student interested in artist moving image. Now, we've talked a bit about the fall, the spring, the kind of constellation of modules, elective and required, that you will take, the types of activities you'll be involved in, the student life and community at both institutions and both departments. And now I'll ask Erica, because the dissertation is that 60 credit final piece that really takes place, I'd say, largely during the summer, although there's a sort of preamble in the spring of advising and supervision that occurs. It's really a summer project. So I'll ask Erica to talk a bit more about that for a few reasons. One is that the dissertation for CAMI aligns with the dissertation requirements for the King's Film Studies MA. It's slightly longer than the MA at the Courtauld, and there's other aspects of it that are more closely aligned with the MA in Film Studies. It also follows those deadlines and those structures. But I'll also ask Erica to talk about the research component of the dissertation, which involves other community building opportunities with MA Film Studies on a very regular rotation, I think bi-weekly or something akin to that. So I'll hand it over to Erica to talk about dissertations.
Sure, thanks, Johanna. So the dissertation module at King's, as Johanna said, takes place mainly over the summer, but it does get going a little earlier. So just last week, I held a kind of first dissertation workshop for the CAMI students and the MA Film Studies students at King's, for people to get started thinking about what might make sense for their dissertation. The idea is that this should be a personal project about which you feel a great passion, but also one that responds to certain disciplinary debates or gaps, places where you can come in and really make an original intervention. The idea is to produce a 12,000 word dissertation. There is also a possibility of doing a practice-based dissertation, which would involve making a short film and producing a shorter piece of research-based writing alongside that. That is open to students if they have done the critical media practice elective, which is the semester 2 filmmaking elective that is at King's, or if you can demonstrate that outside of the CAMI MA, you have an equivalent background in film practice, then the practice-based dissertation is open to you. But by far the majority of the students in the program do traditional written dissertations of 12,000 words. You'll submit a short proposal for that dissertation by the middle of February. And after that time, you'll be assigned a supervisor. The supervisors could be at King's in the Film Studies department, they could be at the Courtauld, and they will be assigned more or less according to expertise. So to match you with someone who has the closest link to the kind of question or topic that you plan to work on. Um, Most often, the real supervision period will begin after the second term has concluded. It's possible to meet with your supervisor at the end of the second term, but it doesn't happen so much because you will be caught up in your second term modules. So generally, it's after the spring break that students start to meet with their supervisors. They have 4 hours of supervision time that can be used up until the supervision period ends, which is typically right around the beginning of July. I believe this year it's like the 2nd or 3rd of July. So you have this period from late April to early July to meet with your supervisor, to workshop your ideas, to plan an outline, maybe even to submit some drafts of writing. The precise way these supervisions work is very much on a bespoke one-to-one basis between the supervisor and the student, depending on what makes most sense for them. In the beginning of June, there is a work in progress conference where students present a short conference paper that could be about a small chunk of their dissertation topic. It could be an overview to the whole project. Again, something for you to discuss with your supervisor. And that's a chance for everyone to sort of get going on the work, to share what they're doing, and to get feedback. After the supervision period ends at the beginning of July, you have time independently on your own to complete the writing of the dissertation, which will be due sometime in early September. So that's like the main trajectory for the dissertation. In terms of other MA events happening at King's throughout the year, there are a series of workshops that take place. Several times a term. It's a little bit irregular, but they're typically on Wednesday afternoons. And this dissertation workshop that I just mentioned, I ran last week, is one of these. But there are others that take place. Things like if you're planning on applying for a PhD, there's an information workshop about that. There's often an information session on study skills, libraries, archives in London. There is an employment workshop. So different kinds of professional development and research development skill workshops that take place on Wednesday afternoons in which everyone is invited to attend. Also, 5 times a term, a little bit later on Wednesdays, the Film Studies Department has its research seminar series, which is a series of invited speakers presenting new research on a variety of topics across the discipline. Some of these will involve artist filmmaking. For instance, we have Martine Beugnet coming at the beginning of March to talk about her work on the aesthetics of blur. But many of them are about other aspects of moving image practice, but I would say they nevertheless can be relevant to CAMI students because you can always get a sense of the bigger methodological, theoretical questions that these scholars are confronting, and this may, in a way, help you reflect on what kind of dissertation project you wish to develop by the end of the year. I would say that the dissertation is the most challenging part of the degree, but also potentially the most rewarding because it's really a place where you get to formulate your own topic and really develop a project that hopefully will be very meaningful to you, but guided by the support of a supervisor from the Courtauld or from King's.
Wow, that's great, Erica. Really amazing, kind of detailed overview of what that experience will look like. And it shows also how you're being really gradually acculturated into an academic culture, professional development, really fully supported through those King's sort of professional development workshops, then followed by research seminars where you're being exposed to contemporary research. Um, I think what's really important to note about this program at King's on Wednesdays is that sort of a standing event in which you get to interact with MA Film Studies peers. Likewise, we have workshops at the Courtauld, also elective, not required, that you can tap into to support your dissertation research or any stage of your professional development. And Erica's just mentioned she's held dissertation workshops that have CAMI students able to think through potential topics. I've also hosted two dissertation workshops this term just as info sessions, sort of brainstorming. We just did a session thinking about generative AI usage, both from a kind of conceptual, intellectual standpoint, but also really just getting into the brass tacks of what's permissible at the postgraduate level. So you are really, really fully supported through both departments. Um, and I think it means that in some sense, the CAMI students really get the best of both possible worlds, both possible departmental resources, able to tap into those as much as they wish. I also want to just emphasize that between the combination of offsite trips, your interaction with peers in MA film studies, but also MA or history of art, MA curating at the Courtauld, you're able to be really highly responsive to what's happening disciplinarily, institutionally, educationally. You're interfacing with all of these different kinds of communities and groups of people and sort of areas of interest simultaneously, which I think is a really rich set of opportunities. And in terms of the dissertations, the timeline of that, could you just give a sense about around when students need to submit those proposals for their dissertations? Is that in January?
February 15th this
February
year.
15th.
The dates always kind of move a little bit according to the quirks of the calendar, but it's a mid-February submission date for the proposal. And that's not a document that is absolutely set in stone, but it is important to have some sense of what the proposed project is by then. But it can be kind of refined in dialogue with the supervisor. It's very, very normal that the parameters of a dissertation project will evolve as the research takes shape.
Great. And what's wonderful also about that is that elongated 12-month timeline really guarantees that you are not feeling rushed in terms of, oh, I have to figure out what I'm writing my dissertation on by November. But in fact, you have adequate time. You have time over the winter break to really kind of mull those ideas over, absorb the material that you're encountering in your coursework, and really then hit the ground running for that summer independent research. Now, speaking of dates and submissions, I'm now going to turn to just really the brass tacks of admissions for CAMI because they are a little bit different, not quite yet. So admissions is also some like dissertations is an aspect of CAMI that is really held more within the King's Film Studies department. So I'm actually going to ask Erica to speak a bit more about admissions just as um, the representative from King's Film Studies, but just so that we're clear, both representatives from both the Courtauld and King's are participating fully in the admissions process and will be reviewing applications. So you're not only applying to King's, you are applying to both. And so your applications should keep in mind that you're being assessed by faculty from both of the institutions and that you will essentially be a student at both institutions. But in terms of the logistics of admissions, that is handled by King's rather than the Courtauld, which is why I'll ask Erica to speak a bit more about things like the way deadlines operate and sort of how that works.
Thanks. There is a first deadline on March 9th for admissions at King's. But if you're interested in applying for that Courtauld scholarship that Johanna mentioned, the deadline for that is much earlier. So do keep that in mind. This first deadline of March 9th is just a first deadline. If there is space left on the course after that, we do continue to accept applications well into the summertime. But if you're sure that this is a program you really want to be a part of, I think it makes sense to try and get your application in by that first deadline because that is when we'll be making the bulk of the decisions about the students for the next cohort. Um, you'll see on the application guidelines that we suggest that it's good to have a background in either art history or film studies. We see in our cohort this year that we have about half and half coming from either background, but also some students who do not have a background in film studies or art history, but perhaps are coming from a kind of neighbor discipline. So that's also okay. I would say that from our point of view, the main thing is to have a kind of strong foundation in humanities methods. And this is something very much in line with what Johanna mentioned earlier about this being a humanities degree that is grounded in critical thinking, writing, and so on. Um, you need to submit a writing sample. Um, in the best case, this writing sample will be on a topic that is proximate to the kind of material that we will confront in the CAMI program, but we recognize that this might not be possible for everyone, depending on what kind of background you're coming from. So the aim there again is to give us a writing sample that really showcases your abilities as a critical thinker, as a writer, and that's possibly engaging with topics from contemporary art and contemporary cinema, or not just contemporary cinema, but cinema in general. There is also a personal statement. This is really a chance for you to tell us about yourself and about why you would like to attend this program in particular. There is no other program like this one. There are a few other programs that look at artist film, but they're primarily practice-based. And so this is an absolutely unique program in terms of working across film studies and art history to look at this area of practice. And so we're especially looking for students who understand that and who know that that's where they want to be. And so the personal statement is a chance for you to tell us why that is, why you're passionate about this area of practice and study. On the King's website, you will find all the details about other kind of technicalities of admissions, such as English language tests, which transcripts you'll need to submit, how you will know if you qualify as a home student or an overseas student, and so on. Sometimes those things can be complicated to determine, but the admissions office at King's can also help you out if you have queries on that front or any queries regarding grade equivalencies across different international systems. Am I forgetting anything, Johanna? I think
No,
that's sort
you've
of most
covered
of the,
really excellently because you hit all of the points I was going to hit in terms of thinking about admissions as a process. Exactly. All of those kind of, tangible, like what do you need to apply? Letters of reference, things like that, the grade equivalencies if you're applying internationally. Those are questions also that need to be addressed to King's admissions. So that's
yes.
a really important point. Meanwhile, though, as Erica pointed out, the scholarship that the Courtauld is offering, the deadline for submitting for that, for applying for that, is the 12th of January. So there are some sort of discrepancies in terms of dates and who you're in touch with for what, but hopefully that will come together and make sense as you're developing the application. Erica, you've hit every major point in terms of students who've reached out and asked, what about my writing sample? If it's not about artist moving image, what should I do? We really are ideally looking for people who've thought about, studied, or written about art history or film studies or potentially even artist moving image in the past. But barring that, we are looking at, the strongest possible piece of writing. And I think if it is the case that you're coming from, for instance, a cognate discipline, or even a practice-based discipline such as fine art or design, or you're coming from theater, or these are just some of the sort of backgrounds that some students have had, coming from cognate, maybe humanities or arts backgrounds, and perhaps you haven't written about this, so you don't have a writing sample that is immediately relevant, the personal statement is the place where you make clear that you understand what this program is about. Okay, so it is important because this program is, as Erica has said, incredibly unique and wonderful for those who are interested in this topic. But if the personal statement doesn't reflect that you understand what the program is actually offering, that will be a mismatch moment. So it is important within the personal statement to truly kind of metabolize what is CAMI, what is the intersection of contemporary art and the moving image. That would just be sort of just our advice from the admissions front. But I think we've covered pretty much everything in rather exhaustive detail. So I will now um, put my questions slide up and invite any of you on the open day session if you have any questions for us, anything we haven't addressed, or you'd like us to speak about, you can put that into the chat. When this recording is sent out to those who signed up to attend. I know that we will also send out relevant links, relevant contact information for both ourselves as the co-leads and potentially also for like the people in admissions that what you might need to be in touch with. But of course, all of this information is also on our respective web pages. Just as a tail end to that discussion of admissions, it's self-evident that to apply for CAMI is to go through the King's webpage for Contemporary Art and the Moving Image, which will then direct you to the King's admissions portal. So that I think covers almost everything. Erica, do you see anything in the chat that's come up that we might need to
Uh,
address?
Not so far, but any questions you may have, really feel free to ask them. There are no stupid questions or no questions that are maybe too obvious or too simple. If you are wondering about it, probably somebody else is too.
Yeah.
So don't be shy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the unique aspects of the program is that we are the first MA program to be generated through a sort of special partnership between the Courtauld and King's College London, which enjoys a sort of special institutional relationship. And this MA program is the first program to be fully 50% split between the two institutions. So truly no questions are not are too self-evident for us to answer.
Johanna, while you were talking about the Venice trip, I wonder
Mm.
if you know that the theme of the next Fondazione in Between Art Film exhibition will be Canicula, heat
Yeah,
wave. So
yeah,
I'm imagining you will also kind of somehow involve questions of like planetary existence,
yes,
climate, and
and
so on.
I
Oh, we might have a
oh,
question. Yes. The first one says, thank you both so much. This has been so helpful. You're very welcome. Obviously, this will be dependent on electives, but how will teaching be structured? How many days a week would we be expecting to be there for on-site teaching?
this is important, and it's actually bringing up something that I forgot to mention, which is that we do offer a part-time option for this MA, and that is something that we have not had a student take us up on yet, but it is available. There is a part-time option available, which essentially I can't just construct what the two-year map looks like right now, but essentially it would just stretch those modules out over 2 years. So you would take the cores and the electives in a kind of 4 semester fall, spring, and then complete the dissertation in the second year summer session. Um, what does a week look like? Now, it's the institutional academic calendars of both of these institutions is slightly shifting. And so I think what I will say to that is that our departments are in close contact about timetabling the modules so that they do not conflict or overlap and allows students the maximum number of possibilities for electives. But a sort of sample schedule for a student would be something like 3 days a week. They are either at the Courtauld or at King's enrolled and taking one of the three courses that they're taking, three modules that they're enrolled in that semester. So for instance, critical debates is about a 90-minute lecture followed by an hour-long seminar. So that would be maybe a Tuesday afternoon. The core module that I teach is from 10 to 12. This year it's on Fridays. I think going forward it won't be. So that might be, for instance, a Monday or a Wednesday morning. And then the King's electives are taking place throughout the week, but generally involve a 2 hour seminar, or sorry, a 1 hour seminar and a 2 hour screening session. Is that?
No, a 2 hour seminar and a 3 hour screening
Oh,
session.
wow. Yeah.
Sometimes the screening session doesn't go the whole 3 hours, but like often it's a 3 hour block that is timetabled to accommodate possibly longer films or double bills or programs of shorts and so on.
Fantastic.
Um, I think the main thing to keep in mind is that a full-time student doing the MA program is meant to make a full-time commitment, i.e., 35 to 40 hours a
Yeah.
week in terms of what is going into the program, but
Yeah.
not all of that time is in-class study. A lot of that
Exactly.
time is independent study, doing the readings, kind of preparing and so on, writing. But in terms of class time, the modules will be between 2 on the low side and 5 on the high side hours per week. Um, and the timetabling is dependent on the schedules of the institution.
Yeah.
And so some students do have part-time jobs and so on alongside this, but it's a matter of kind of coordinating those schedules alongside the fixed timetable.
Yeah.
Um, while we're on this topic, there is a third question. I will return to the second question in a moment because it's a slightly different one. But the third question is, do you feel there are any key advantages to pursuing the program full-time versus part-time? I think from my point of view, this really has to do with your individual situation. Some people really love the idea of coming in, fully devoting themselves, giving all of their concentration for 12 months to this program. For other people, they have commitments that make that impossible. Other people enjoy the idea of having a longer period of time so that everything kind of unfolds at a slightly slower pace and you have more time to kind of ruminate on some of the topics that you're working on. I can say from the MA Film Studies side, we have very few part-time students, but every year we might have one or two out of a cohort of something like 40. In CAMI so far, we have only full-time students, but there is this part-time possibility.
Yeah.
So it's something really to think about in relation to, I think, your own circumstances, and how you imagine, spending your time over the next year or two.
Yeah. I would also just note that for things like um, in the core modules, when it comes to these offsites, these are things that are often being scheduled. I don't want to say ad hoc, but they are responsive to the institutional's calendars and schedules of exhibitions, screenings, and so forth. So there are some weeks when we're going to go see an exhibition together on a Tuesday, and there's other weeks where it might happen on a Thursday or a Friday. And I've had experiences with some students who are thinking about employment possibilities and scheduling, and they're having to make decisions about whether they're going to be available to do things on a kind of more spontaneous basis, or sometimes not always timetabled consistently week to week. And these are just like Erica says, these are the sort of situational choices that one makes. But on the flip side, there are students who come in with job opportunities, career opportunities in the sector, curating, working for organizations where the work they would be doing is directly relevant to their studies that they may want to take advantage of. And so part-time might be a good option for them. So I think it is very individual. And I personally cannot see any downside to being a part-time student. In fact, it might be an asset for those of you who have an existing position in the field or are trying to secure one.
I agree. The second question was, is there a way to check what topics students have written their theses on? The quick answer is no. We're currently in the first cohort. which means that the first CAMI students will be submitting their dissertation proposals only this coming February. But I believe even beyond that, in general, at King's, certainly it's not possible to access the topics of previous MA students. What you can do, however, is look at the publications that are coming from the faculty members who are teaching on the program. And that will give you a kind of broad sense of the kind of work, for instance, that's being done in the film studies department at King's, where there are a range of people that are working on experimental film and artist moving image practices across a number of different geographical regions and also kind of conceptual frameworks. And so, if you look at the kind of scholarship that's being published by the instructors on the program, that would give you one sense of the kinds of topics that will be of interest. But the other thing to say is that there is so much flexibility with the dissertation that it really is up to you to generate your own topic. So, in a way, I would not start from thinking about what others have done before. I would start from thinking about really what you're passionate about. What is something you really want to spend some time with, that you will not get bored of, and that will really give you something you can dig your teeth into to think about for a long period of time. Um, yeah.
I'll just add to that that the Courtauld publishes all of their MA dissertations, but
Uh-huh.
as Eric has mentioned, the CAMU students haven't written theirs yet, so you won't be able to see those now, or even probably until next 2027 probably would be the soonest because they will be submitted in September, marked, assessed, and so forth, and students from that program won't graduate until the end of next year. So you can't look at CAMI students' MAs, but ultimately, one day, 2027, probably they will be published and they'll be accessible in our library where we publish all of our MA dissertations. You can go on site. But as Erica said, I'm not sure that that's the most relevant kind of course of research for thinking about potential dissertation topics. Faculty research is a good place to start. I know that within, looking at the Courtauld's library, one could potentially look at what types of moving image art dissertations have been written in the MA History of Art program. But again, I'm not sure this would be sort of the richest vein to mine ideas from. I think it's more of relevance to see what people are thinking about teaching and in the faculty.
Are there any final questions, topics that you would like us to address that we haven't so far?
I'll mention something fun coming up. Erica mentioned that Canicula is the upcoming theme, and I think this past Biennale it was Nebula. So thinking in kind of Latinate ideas around atmospheres, ecologies, and I think Erica, you participated in the symposium they had on the nebula
Hmm.
concept of atmospheres. The artistic director and the curator of the artistic program of the Fondazione, Alessandro Robertini and Leonardo Bagazzi are going to be giving a kind of workshop to students at the Courtauld in January and also holding an event at the Research Forum where we have a panel with myself and them and also one of the co-leads of our MA in curating talking about curating moving image art, talking about the sort of triad of exhibitions, Canicula, Nebula, and I can't remember the first one before that.
Penumbra.
Penumbra, talking about this triad, they conceive of it of exhibitions going back through 2026, 2024, 2022, and thinking about curate. I think it's called Curating Beyond the Black Box. So that's another opportunity where CAMI students are going to be really moving or thinking in tandem with MA curating students and interfacing with the representatives from the Fondazione, which sponsors exhibitions all over the world, but specifically in London, they've just curated and sponsored the Karima Ashadu exhibition tendered at Camden Arts Center, which we went and visited for one of our offsites and had Alice give a talk to the students. So multiple opportunities to interface, again, not just with artists or with scholars, but also with curators and people working within kind of institutions, foundations for moving image art, practice, exhibition, curation, programming, and so forth. Do we have any
Great.
questions?
There have been no further questions, so maybe it's a good time
Yeah,
for us to draw it to a close.
that's
Thanks so much,
almost an
everyone, for
hour. Yeah.
coming.
Thank you
Yeah,
for coming and asking great questions, and don't hesitate to be in touch.